For the first time in centuries, researchers have uncovered what's believed to be Jesus' tomb inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Chris Mitchell takes us to the heart of Jerusalem's Old City, where a major renovation is underway.
Since the early 1980s, Ron Wyatt, a nurse anaesthetist, has discovered nearly a dozen biblical artifacts and sites, including Moses' lost tomb. Despite his lack of formal archaeological training, Ron's findings, especially Moses' tomb, have gained attention. Though his proof isn't enough to convince all professionals, his work is still considered noteworthy. Recently, archaeologist and TV host Josh Gates also claimed to have found Moses' resting place. Where do Ron and Josh say the site is, and what other discoveries has Ron made? Keep watching to find out. Moses' historical resting. If there is a historical Moses, where was he buried? At Mount Nebo. In the 1980s, Ron Wyatt caused a stir by claiming he discovered the burial site of the biblical figure Moses. From the readings of the Bible, Moses was the one who guided the Israelites on the journey to freedom from Egypt and was privileged to receive the Ten Commandments from God. It was also stated that for centuries, scholars have been looking for where his body is buried. Ron Wyatt has suggested that Moses was buried at a place known today as Mount Nebo in Jordan. This area is very possible because, according to the Bible, Moses went up Mount Nebo to look at the Promised Land. The scripture reveals that after Moses had achieved his dream of seeing the Promised Land, he died there. Ron Wyatt believed he located this special burial ground at Mount Nebo. It is not precisely stated where Moses was buried, but the scripture says it was in the land of Moab, on the side opposite Beth Peor. In the biblical account, he passed away in a valley opposite Mount Nebo, on the opposite side of the Jordan River. Could Ron have filled a missing gap in the Bible story? Although Ron Wyatt's claims of finding critical biblical sites, including Moses' tomb, still exist, he did not provide solid proof that other experts could verify. Explorers who claim to see important sites or artifacts must show clear proof, such as objects, detailed maps, photographs, or scientific tests. Wyatt needed to provide more proof of this. Professional archaeologists have specific methods for studying ancient sites, including careful digging, detailed records, and scientific tools. Wyatt's methods did not match professional standards, making it hard for other experts to trust his findings. Many professional archaeologists and scholars found many problems with Wyatt's work, such as a lack of proper evidence and mistakes in his research. Due to these issues, many experts criticized his work. Ron Wyatt isn't the only one who has claimed to have found Moses' tomb. Several religious believers, archaeologists, and scientists have stepped forward to boast of discovering this biblical resting place. One of them is Josh Gates, who is the most convincing after Ron's claims. In a 2022 episode of his show called Expedition Unknown, archaeologist Josh Gates and his team retraced Moses' steps from the top of Mount C deep into the Israeli desert in hopes of finding his tomb and artifacts to show for it. They even dived into the Sea of Galilee in search of it. Eventually, they concluded that the tomb was situated in the Sea of Galilee. Still, how could he have been buried underwater? Maybe he was laid to rest in a much shallower region of the sea, but over time, the sea level rose and wholly submerged it. What do you think? This isn't a magic rock that followed the Israelites through the desert, but could it be connected to the story of Exodus? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Scovery. Another convincing claim someone has made of finding Moses' resting place is the one made by the late Rabbi Schneerson, the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic movement. According to rumor, he said he looked at Moses' real grave when he toured Egypt in the mid-80s. He was a religious teacher among the Jewish people who was given due consideration due to his words and his presence. That is, his reported visit to the site of Moses' tomb was sensational at that time, particularly among his followers and other religious people who were engaged in biblical archaeology. They wanted to know how he did it. Unfortunately, there is very little documentation or evidence to verify Rabbi Schneerson's discovery. He should have provided specific information or evidence to support his claim, leaving many questions unanswered. However, one detail makes his claim fascinating and believable. Rabbi Schneerson's purported visit to the site of Moses' tomb perfectly matches various medieval Jewish traditions that mention the tomb's location on Mount Nebo in modern-day Jordan. These traditions are based on religious texts and need more real-life archaeological evidence. As in many other regions of the Middle East, including Egypt, Jordan, and Israel, there are local legends about the burial place of Moses. These cultural and religious traditions are typically passed down through word of mouth and therefore usually are not encouraged by historical or even archaeological evidence. For example, in Egypt, Moses is probably buried on Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula, where the Ten Commandments were said. Apart from Mount Nebo, people have connected other places in Jordan to the burial place of Moses, such as places in the Jordan Valley, specifically in the vicinity of Mount Nebo, where Jordanian folks have erected shrines or other structures revered concerning Moses. Thus, numerous places are considered to be the burial site of Moses in the territory of modern Israel. Among them is one situated in the area currently identified as modern Jericho. Here, Moses is believed to have died and been buried by the direct intervention of God. A second location is town of Nablus in the West Bank has a tomb that is said to be of Moses. These contradicting locations make one accurate wonder. How can one tradition mention Mount Nebo and another mention that Moses' tomb is close to Mount Nebo but not on the mount? However, no historical or archaeological facts would prove the stories relating to the burial place of Moses. Similar to other patriarchs of the Old Testament, Moses' death and burial are described very briefly, and no specific geographical location is mentioned regarding the tomb. Such traditions are accompanied by shifts in the region's geography over centuries and the absence of historical records. If you thought the discovery of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson's identification of Moses' resting place on Mount Nebo in modern-day Jordan was shocking, brace yourself for the profound significance of Mount Nebo to Christianity. What hidden secrets does Mount Nebo hold for Christians? Let's find out. Mount Nebo's significance to Christians. The site of Mount Nebo, which marks the endpoint of the Israelite journey through the wilderness and serves as a focal point for those who want to be close to the place associated with such scriptural figures as Moses, can be noted as remarkable. This makes it all the more appealing that the Christians had their presence here, where some remnants of the period's history can be substantiated, such as early Christian mosaics belonging to the 4th century AD, which indicate the community's adoration of Moses. Being subjected to the control of the Franciscan order, the team has been very instrumental in the administration, restoration, and archaeological exploration of Mount Nebo. They discovered artifacts and features that depict their historical and religious significance or value, beautiful moors famous for their spiritual meanings. These mosaics reveal the technical skills of the artisans and can be deemed as artifacts of religious devotion, which are visual witnesses of the relationship between art, religion, and history at Mount Nebo. Excavations carried out by the Franciscans are still ongoing, and more valuable material has been revealed that supports the biblical version of Mount Nebo's history and its religious significance. These findings and widening knowledge about early Christians' worship of Moses also point to the long relationship between belief and evidence in exploring history. Ron Wyatt's discovery of Noah's Ark. Now, here's where things get even more enjoyable. You wouldn't believe Moses' tomb isn't the only biblical site Ron Wyatt claims to have found. He also developed many other assertions regarding finding sites and artifacts of biblical significance. He said he located Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, and many others. That one has seen evidence of Noah's Ark is an excitement that may be construed as a clue solely to the conventional wisdom of today's world. His discovery of Noah's Ark is the second he made after uncovering the tomb of Moses, which has been the most shocking to the press throughout the years, especially in the mid-1980s. For several attempts, Ron Wyatt wanted to popularize the site, which he claimed was where Noah's Ark was. He penned emails to many personalities, including Colonel James Irwin, a veteran US astronaut, and Dr. John Morris, a scientist at the Institute for Creation Research. Even though they visited the site, Irwin and Morris still determined what they saw. In 1985, Wyatt was joined by David Fassold, a former merchant marine officer, and Dr. John Baumgartner, a geophysicist. Initially, these men worked with Wyatt at the site, but they both distanced themselves from him over time. Fassold disagreed with Wyatt about specific details of the find, leading to their separation. Dr. Baumgartner, who was initially cautious and hopeful about the site, later became firm in his belief that the location does not contain the remains of Noah's Ark. In 1990, an Australian named Dr. Alan Roberts visited the site where Ron Wyatt believed he had found Noah's Ark. After this visit, Dr. Roberts started an organization called Ark Search to raise money for an archaeological dig with Wyatt. Their efforts gained global attention in September 1991 when they, along with 3 others, were kidnapped and held by Kurdish guerrillas for 3 weeks. Despite this, Wyatt and Roberts continued to promote the site as the possible remains of Noah's Ark. They promoted it so much that they even appeared on national TV, and from there, things took a strange turn. What do you think about Ron Wyatt's claim to have discovered Noah's Ark? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Attempts to prove Ron Wyatt's claims right. Over the years, Wyatt appeared on several US television shows to discuss his discovery. He used these interviews and footage from his team's work at the site to create a video. This video was widely shared and watched by many Christians, generating excitement about the possibility that Noah's Ark had been found. Meanwhile, in the first half of 1992, Dr. Roberts traveled around Australia lecturing about the site. His organization, Ark Search, also produced a booklet summarizing their evidence and sold a video of his public lectures. Despite these efforts and the excitement they generated, a detailed examination of the claim shows that none of the evidence holds up to scrutiny. Surveys using metal detectors discovered a pattern of hotspots that, when connected, showed a regular arrangement of lines running lengthwise and across the inside of the formation. These hotspots showed areas with high iron content. They could be followed along these lines with a metal detector, forming iron lines when using a standard metal detector similar to those used for beachcombing with a disc-shaped detector head on a long pole. Hotspots were also found. Still, these hotspots were scattered randomly and did not form a regular pattern along lines. This type of metal detector can only detect metal objects up to about 1 foot deep. Therefore, the hotspots they found likely represent objects with high metal content buried in the surface mudflow material. This description matches the many basalt boulders, a common volcanic rock in the area, that are randomly buried in the mud and sometimes stick out. The basalt boulders in the region are often weathered and contain iron oxides. These iron oxides cause the metal detector to react positively, unlike the dead mud that doesn't trigger the detector. That's not all. The instrument also did not find iron lines connecting the hotspots. Multiple metal detector surveys confirmed that these hotspots were randomly distributed, not in any specific pattern. Even with this in mind, some have falsely claimed that these random hotspots support diagrams showing the internal structure of a boat such as Noah's Ark. In June and July 1986, John Baumgartner and Dr. William Shea were planning to meet Ron Wyatt at the site in Turkey. Wyatt and David Fassold informed them that they had visited a site without a permit and, in 30 minutes, made 10 passes with a radar scanner over only the southernmost part of the boat shape known as the prow. When Wyatt met Shea, he gave him copies of these radar scans, which Shea later shared with others for further examination. The permit for further investigation was eventually approved. Still, Wyatt, Fassold, and their team were not allowed to return to the site with a radar scanner because of restrictions from the local police and military. As a result, the planned comprehensive radar scanning of the entire formation never took place, at least not by Wyatt and Fassold, according to available reports. Even with this, Wyatt and Roberts have published diagrams of the boat-shaped formation, claiming to show an internal structure with transverse and longitudinal divisions. They labeled these supposed features as bulkheads and gunnels, referencing Fassold's limited 1986 survey of just part of the formation to support their claims. Wyatt and Roberts have cited Tom Fenner from a geophysical survey conducted by Systems Incorporated in New Hampshire. They assert that Fenner examined the 1986 radar scans and concluded that the formation was an artificial boat. More alleged discoveries by Ron Wyatt. Ron said the other discovery he made was the Ark of the Covenant hidden under the Temple Mount, Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is significant in Jewish Christianity and Islam, making it prized and sacred among believers of the three religions. According to Jewish mythology, this place holds the remains of the Jewish temples. Float Yahweh's instructions. In the early 1980s, Wyatt said he found the Ark while cave exploring Temple Mount. He was convinced that he saw a building that contained the Ark and other things, such as the table of showbread applicable to the temple. There is a need to note that Wyatt depicted the Ark as described in the Bible. He told me that it was of wooden material with gold and covered with 2 cherubs, heavenly beings. He suggested that it was still in solid condition after thousands of years. Wyatt did not, for much substantive physical evidence of his claimed assertion in his testimony. He said that he captured photographs. However, the captured photos could have been more precise or sharp enough to warrant the belief of most professionals. He also said he carried back samples, but research and tests could not substantiate these. Some critics who do not believe in Wyatt's stories are the archaeologists and historians. They argue that he failed to adhere to ethical best practices intrinsic to archaeology. His discoveries were not peer-assessed or independently verified by other archaeologists. For this reason, it becomes difficult to believe his finding to be true because no concrete proof is provided. There was also his so-called finding of the very site of Sodom and Gomorrah. These are lists of cities whose names feature in the Holy Bible as the places where God rained fire and brimmed neurons because of the sins of their inhabitants. As performed in chapter 19 of the Holy Bible, God sent down fire and brimstones, sulfur, which purged Sodom and Gomorrah. Wyatt located the remains of these cities around the Dead Sea on the side of the southeast. Wyatt's discovery included several critical pieces of evidence that he believed pointed to the biblical city's fiery destruction. One of the main pieces of evidence was the presence of large areas covered in ash. Wyatt thought this ash was the remains of buildings and structures burned to the ground. The ash was unusually pure and light in color, which he believed showed a high-temperature fire. This supported the idea that the cities were destroyed by a catastrophic event, as described in the Bible. Another main piece of evidence Wyatt found was small round balls of sulfur in the ashen rock. He said these sulfur balls were unlike any other because of their high purity and how they were scattered around the area. The presence of sulfur aligns with the biblical description of brimstone falling from the sky. Sulfur is a chemical element that burns very hot, and finding it in pure balls is unusual, which made Wyatt very invested in this discovery. The area Wyatt identified as Sodom and Gomorrah had hard-to-miss shapes in the rock and ash that looked like the outlines of ancient buildings. He believed these shapes were the remains of walls, streets, and structures from the ancient cities. This bolstered his conviction that he had found the biblical cities. Despite his findings, most professional archaeologists and geologists are understandably skeptical of Wyatt's claims. Critics argue that the ash and sulfur could have natural explanations. The area around the Dead Sea has been geologically active for millions of years, and natural processes could create the formations Wyatt found. Additionally, Wyatt's methods were outside the standard archaeological practices. He often worked alone or with small teams, and his work needed the systematic documentation typical in professional archaeology. Wyatt's claims are often criticized. Firstly, his discoveries were not approved by other professionals in this field, which is one of the essential conditions within the study of archaeology. Secondly, geologists use the evidence to counter the view that sulfur balls and ash deposits could have resulted from a geologic event and not an act of God. Dead Sea area can be associated with sulfur and other minerals because of the specific geological conditions. Ron Wyatt also stated this when he claimed he found a site where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea during the Exodus. In the Holy Bible, Moses and the Israelites escaped from Egypt towards the Red Sea. God provided a bridge to cross the sea. If the Egyptian army followed the waters, the latter again closed and drowned them in their chariots. Wyatt claimed the crossing site was at the Gulf of Aqaba, a part of the Red Sea. He suggested the Israelites crossed at a specific point called Nuweiba Beach. Wyatt and his team conducted dives in the Gulf of Aqaba, reporting finding underwater evidence supporting this idea. They claimed to discover coral-encrusted objects identified as chariot wheels and other artifacts from the Egyptian army. Wyatt believed these wheels were from the drowned chariots and claimed to find humans, horse bones, and other items he thought were remnants of the Egyptian army. He noted an underwater land bridge at the crossing site, which he said facilitated the Israelites crossing when the waters parted. Wyatt explained that coral growth had obscured these artifacts, initially making them difficult to identify. Despite Wyatt's claims, many experts remain skeptical. Critics argue that independent archaeologists or underwater experts did not verify Wyatt's discoveries. They also suggest the coral formation could be natural and not necessarily remnants of chariots. The lack of clear, verifiable evidence and peer review means Wyatt's claims about the Red Sea crossing remain controversial. Following the Red Sea saga, Ron Wyatt presented another incredible discovery. He claimed to have found Mount Sinai, where Moses received the Ten Commandments, contrary to the traditionally believed location in the Sinai Peninsula. Wyatt identified Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia as the true Mount Sinai. He pointed to various features in this mountainous region as evidence supporting his claim. Wyatt researched and explored the area, searching for clues that matched the biblical account of Moses' journey. One significant piece of evidence Wyatt highlighted was a large split rock near Jebel al-Lawz. In his understanding, this rock gave water to the Israelis, which Moses provided through the help of the rock in the wilderness, as prescribed in the Old Testament. Apart from the split rock, Wyatt discovered other specific structures believed to be around the area as described in the Bible by Wyatt. These features, such as rocks, valleys, and different geographical features that he believed conformed to the biblical historicity of Moses leading the Israelites in the wilderness. Like all his other findings, Wyatt has not substantiated the part he has made regarding Mount Sinai. However, it is necessary to note that his photographs and videos must be more professionally archaeological or geologically concluded. For this reason, it is not shocking that many scholars and archaeologists entirely disregard Wyatt's assertion about Mount Sinai. They note the biblical history of the traditional location in the Sinai and the absence of evidence for the proposed Saudi Arabian relocation. Continuing with his discoveries, Ron Wyatt's next find would be, do not pronounce it, Joseph's grain bins. Wyatt argued that he stumbled across these stylistic arches in Egypt, which he said were grain storehouses constructed by Joseph as per the scriptures. This was narrated in the biblical account relating to Joseph, the son of Jacob, who successfully interpreted Pharaoh's dream of 2 sheaves of grain nourishing 7 other sheaves, signifying 7 years of good harvest followed by 7 years of barrenness. Therefore, when the Egyptians had an abundance of grain again, Pharaoh made Joseph the only official in charge of the grain to store it in anticipation of the famine. Wyatt also went to Egypt in search of architectural structures that met the descriptions of Joseph's grain granary. He sorts them out in structures there, in the region of the ancient city of Memphis, the Nile Delta area. Wyatt referred to them as big boxes, rectangular depressions in the ground built of stone or bricks, which he said corresponded to the grain bins that Joseph used to store grain in the years of plenty. For this, Wyatt quoted the following passages of the Bible in a bid to offer his source-based identification of these structures as the bins that housed Joseph's grain, namely, again, like all the other statements that Wyatt made, a scientist has not proven the statement about Joseph's grain bin. Unlike his claim about finding Moses' tomb, in which he presented photographic and video evidence, archaeologists have not accepted his findings. The possibility remains that his discoveries challenge what experts have sought for centuries, which could explain their reluctance to embrace Wyatt's claims. If you thought the alleged discoveries by Ron Wyatt were shocking, hold on. We're about to reveal Ron Wyatt's claim to have found the actual site of Jesus' crucifixion. Could this discovery be the most significant archaeological find in Christian history? Ron Wyatt's discovery of the actual site of Jesus' crucifixion. Wyatt then went from Old Testament discovery to New Testament discovery, or from one half of the Bible to the other, and not just anyone in the New Testament, but the Son of God. Ron Wyatt, retired oil pipeline inspector and evangelical Christian, wanted the world to know that he had located the actual site of Jesus' crucifixion and the garden tomb in Jerusalem. Culturally and religiously, the account suggests that Jesus was crucified in a place referred to as Golgotha or Calvary and was interred in a tomb close to the place. A few people hold that the garden tomb is the burial and resurrection site of Jesus. Wyatt claimed he had found proof to support his proposition that this was traditional knowledge of Aboriginal people. He was also interested in the geographical detail concerning Jerusalem to identify the exact area where Jesus was crucified and buried. According to the theory outlined by Wyatt, the true location of the church cannot be the original one. Therefore, he proposed an alternative location outside the city walls of Jerusalem. There, he found a site with a rocky cleft shaped like a skull known in Aramaic as Golgotha, and a garden with a tomb. Wyatt demonstrated one particular fact by the entrance to the tomb, where he showed that there was a huge stone that, according to the scriptures, had been rolled before the tomb of Jesus after the resurrection of the Lord. Not surprisingly, Wyatt has failed this particular type of scientific verification of his stated claim about the location of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. Feeling that was not enough, Ron Wyatt also said he found the exact location of the rebellion led by Korah. This is one of the famous events narrated in the Bible, which mainly details how the earth gaped and devoured Korah and his compatriots. In the Bible, Korah challenged the authority of Moses and Aaron. For this, God decided to swallow the rebels, Korah and his family, accompanied by their possessions. Wyatt proceeded to do research and explore the area of the wilderness described in the Bible in an attempt to find supporting facts about Korah's rebellion. He felt confident that he had identified the location of this event. He directed attention to things such as fissures, crevices, or chasms, as the ground splitting was recorded in the Bible. However, like other similar statements, this has not been fully verified and has been met with criticism by the scientific society. Could there be a hidden truth in Ron Wyatt's discoveries that other researchers don't want us to find out? Despite being allowed to dig within a privately owned garden multiple times, including in the summer of 1991, staff members of the association observed his progress and entered his excavated shaft. Nothing was ever discovered to support his claims, and no evidence of biblical artifacts or temple treasures was seen. Joe Zias, an archaeologist from the Israel Antiquities Authority (IAA), has stated that Ron Wyatt is neither an archaeologist nor has he ever carried out a legally licensed excavation in Israel or Jerusalem. To excavate, one must have at least a BA in archaeology, which he does not possess despite his claims to the contrary. Wyatt's official organization, Wyatt Archaeological Research (WAR), claims that the IAA has always been aware of the excavations and issued verbal permits for most of them and official permits to all WAR excavations since 2002. However, the only evidence of WAR's involvement in a legitimate excavation sanctioned by the IAA relates to WAR's helping to fund a dig in 2005. Some evangelicals have also been critical of Wyatt's claims. Answers in Genesis called Wyatt's claims fraudulent. But could these criticisms be part of an effort to obscure the real significance of Wyatt's discoveries? People are still talking about Ron Wyatt's discoveries and different opinions. Whether you believe him or not, his search has made people discuss faith, history, and how we prove things in archaeology. The controversy and skepticism surrounding Wyatt's work only make us wonder what truths might still be hidden.